And thank you for joining me today and for your interest in the race in San Marcos. If you live in San Marcos, you're likely getting your water and wastewater services from the Vallecillos Water District. Vallecillos Water District had their last public hearing to raise rates in 2017. And they set the rates for 2018 and 2019. At that meeting, they presented a survey. They surveyed all 23 water agencies in San Diego County, right? They pulled out themselves, and well, for this presentation, I pulled out the Vallecillos Water District and its 5 closest neighbors. These water agencies, their service boundaries touch our service boundaries. And so what they did is to survey, they said, what are their monthly bills if they use 13 units of water for a resident with a small meter? So they did the survey, and wow, they were the lowest ones, right? But it's very hard to come up with a fair comparison because all of these agencies have multiple rates. It depends on your size meter, the rate. It depends on what type of customer you are. There's different rates for residential, commercial, and irrigation. And also there's fixed charges versus volumetric charges. Very hard to get a fair comparison. But we have the benefit of hindsight now, and we probably have some top-notch econ students in here. Who's an econ? We do. Okay. I'll get your professor to double your extra credit if you can tell me, with the benefit of hindsight, what is a fair way to do a rate comparison that encompasses all those variables I talked about and have one rate to show everything. And I'll give you a hint, we're selling a commodity.
I'm not sure. I'm taking one-on-one, so.
No excuses there. No. Anybody else can tell me how to do a fair comparison here? Well, we have the benefit of hindsight. 2018 is over, right? And they have audited numbers for the fiscal year ends in June 30. So what we can do is take total revenue divided by the number of acre feet they sold. And that just gives you one rate across to see what the comparison is. And when we do that, you'll see Valley Center, they sell the most water of any of these agencies. So they're able to absorb their fixed charges. Rainbow and Valley Center sell the most water per customer, so they're able to absorb the fixed charge that the customers have to pay, right? If you're a water customer, you pay a fixed charge in addition to your volumetric charges. So they're able to absorb the rate. Rincon is just the opposite. They sell 1/3 the amount of water that Vallecillos sells, so they can't absorb those fixed charges. Rincon and Vista Irrigation District, they have the lowest usage per customer, so it's hard for them to absorb those fixed charges. Vallecillos' rates are high for 2 reasons. One is seawater desalination. San Diego County Water Authority is the regional wholesaler in San Diego, and they have a 48,000 acre feet per year take or pay contract with Poseidon Water for that desalinated water. And they pay almost twice the amount that they pay for other sources of water for that desal. Why would they do that? Well, it's only 8% of their total water supply portfolio, so they can dilute the impact from that high rate. Now, Carlsbad and Vallecillos are the only 2 districts that have a special contract with San Diego County Water Authority where they can take water directly from that treatment plant. But they pay the full price, not the diluted price. So Vallecillos takes 3,500 acre feet of that 48,000 acre feet of water, and it makes up 25% of their supply portfolio. So they have a harder time diluting that high price for water. Why would they pay so much for water? There's 3 reasons, 3 benefits that ratepayers get from that desal. One, it's very good quality water, much better than Colorado River where most of our water comes from. 2, it's diversification. You can diversify the supply and also the source point, more important. All the water comes from the north right now. If we get an interruption of service, well, now we have right in San Marcos, and that's where our take is for desal water. It's right here in San Marcos, so if something happens. The 3rd reason, and most important, is that it's drought-proof. The Metropolitan Water District, San Diego County Water Authority, they can't tell us, hey, you have to cut back on that desal. No, we get 100% of that water. Even if we have 20 years of drought, we still have 100% of that desal water. So that's the biggest benefit on that desal. So, the other reason why Vallecillos rates are high There's no benefit from the ratepayers yet, but I'll tell you first about public utility money. I'm going to tell you first about public utility money. So you can divide it into two categories. One is ratepayer money, the other category is developer money. So ratepayers, that's the bills you pay, your water and sewer bills, right? And then the agency takes that money and they pay for operating costs, they pay to replace and repair existing infrastructure, and what's left over is operating reserves, replacement reserves. It's your money, it's ratepayer money. And on the other side, you have the developer money. Developers pay what's called a capital facility fee, and it offsets their impacts on growth. So that's restricted money when it comes in. It comes in, and the agency can only spend it on infrastructure and assets that accommodate growth. And then what's left over is still restricted, but it's developer money. Now let's see what these agencies have accumulated in ratepayer money. Vallecito's Water, this is based on June 30, 2018 audited numbers. Vallecito's Water District, as of June 30, 2018, accumulated $84.4 million in ratepayer money. That is the most of any agency in all of San Diego County. Now, a prudent board would say, let me carve off a section of that $84.4 million and call it rate stabilization. What rate stabilization means is, instead of raising our rates to cover ever-increasing operating costs, we'll keep the rates stable and use this money instead. Vallecito's Water District adopts a budget every year, and with that budget is a 5-year long-range plan. So what are their plans to spend down this accumulation of money? They don't have plans to spend it down. They're going to increase it to $96 million. Why do they need so much money? Let's take a look at the developer side. These same agencies, what have they accumulated in developer money? Vallecito's has accumulated nothing. They have a $16 million deficit. And by the way, they're the only agency in San Diego County with a deficit in their developer funds. So we don't have $84.4 million laying around, right? A chunk of that one to pay this developer burden, right? To pay for developer cost obligation. So that's not so bad if they restore the deficit. If they restore this deficit, it's like paying back the ratepayers. It's like paying back the ratepayers. So in that 5-year plan, what are their plans to restore the deficit? They don't have a plan to restore the deficit. They're going to accelerate it to $44 million. And worse than that, there's no intention to debt finance anything, issue bonds, but yet they tacked on debt proceeds at the end of this projection period. If you take those debt proceeds off, it's actually a $56 million run-up in this deficit for money. But they say that the deficit's only $11 million now. You know, we're recovering from the deficit. The budget projected, or it is budgeted for this fiscal year and now to spend just shy of $9 million out of that developer fund. So what did we spend so far the first 9 months of the year? $2.6 million. $3 million is for debt service, so it has to be paid, this debt service, within the next 3 months. So when the debt comes due, right, you got to pay the bondholders back. There's no money in developer money, so the ratepayers again will pay that $3 million. So we'll be back by the end of the year close to that $16 million of a deficit. Why are we even talking about a deficit? Anybody see any development lately around San Marcos? You ever drive around and see development happening around here lately? That's a rhetorical question. It drives my wife crazy. Whenever I go past a development, I roll down my window and say, "You're welcome," you know, because we're paying for that. As ratepayers, we're paying for that. And these are, that's what we're talking about. Now, these are building permits issued by the City of San Marcos in their comprehensive annual financial report since 2006. And you'll hear like excuses for the deficit to say, "Oh, it's cyclical," and it is cyclical. You know, in times when development is really high, we've got a surplus in that developer fund. But then when development slows down and we start spending some of that money, here's what Vallecito's Water District's development fund has done. So it started out really high when we had that peak of construction. It goes down, and watch 2013. 2013 is when you would think it would go up, but whoa, what happened? It's dropped down below the line, even though we have all this development going on. So remember 2013 as a very pivotal year, and you'll find out, you know, just why we have that deficit. We'll get into that in a minute. So anyway, when they talk about, oh, the deficit's going down, why are they even saying we have a deficit? We should have a surplus, a pretty big surplus by now. We looked at ratepayers rates, let's look at developer fees. Okay, so water EDUs means equivalent dwelling unit of capacity, and we'll define that a little bit later, but that's the fees that these developers pay. I only did water here because some of these agencies don't have sewer. So for a water EDU, and let's look at these things here, Olevenhain has a little bit of development, and they adjusted their rate in 2016. They have 5 different zones. The lowest one is 10,200, the highest one is 21,600. This is an average, just for presentation purpose, of their 5 zones. Rainbow anticipates some development. They adjusted their rate in 2017. Rincon, Valley Center, and VID are built out. They have no new development going on, so they don't collect capacity fees. They probably haven't adjusted those rates in decades. They don't need to. They don't get revenue from it. So when you eliminate those, Vallecito has the lowest cap fee, water cap fee. Now, and we're going to talk about a board turnover in 2000, at the end of 2012 into 2013. Since that board turnover, this has been the increase in developer fees compared to the increase in water and sewer rates. Only inflationary for developer fees, 2.6%, 6% on average year over year for water and sewer rates. And that's based on audited numbers. That's audited water and sewer revenue divided by acre feet sold each year. How did we get here? Okay, here's the and this will take a little bit of technical explaining, so I'm sorry, but I have to give you a little background first. First on publicly owned utilities, right? To understand a publicly owned utility, let's contrast that with something we're more familiar with, corporation. Who owns a corporation?
Stockholders.
Stockholders. How do they evidence their ownership?
Buying stocks.
Share of stock. Right, share of stock. Who owns a publicly owned utility?
The public.
Publicly owned. So if you pay rates in San Marcos, you own a piece of the Vallecito's water district. How do you evidence your ownership?
Pay rates.
No. An EDU of capacity. Right? An EDU of capacity actually gives you ownership to the capacity, the infrastructure of the system. Now, the developers pay for it, but it stays with the property. So when you're a homeowner and you buy that home, most people don't even realize it, that they own a piece of Vallecito's water district. They have a capacity right to use 500 gallons of water per day and to discharge 250 gallons a day into the sewer. So that's what you own. Now, how do they set those rates? It's called an EDU, equivalent dwelling unit. How do they set those rates? It's actually very, very easy. It's a fraction. And in the numerator of this fraction is what it costs to accommodate that growth. What does it cost to build the infrastructure and assets we need to accommodate growth over a 25, 30-year planning period? And the denominator is how many EDUs are we going to add over that same period of time? And you divide it up. That's pretty simple, right? That's how they come up with that rate. That's how they come up with that $7,000. Now, how do they come up with the numbers to put in the numerator and the numbers to put in the denominator? Right? That's the question. That is called a master plan, and a master plan is not so simple. A master plan is a very detailed, comprehensive study of all of the infrastructure they'll need and the timing of when it has to be online and the cost of it. And then they also stretch out and figure out what growth is going to happen over this period of time. It is a document that is very much scrutinized. It's open for public review by regulatory agencies, environmental agencies, the public, and then the board has to certify it and adopt it. So that's the basis for the fee. So you can't deviate from the master plan assumptions. When you do that, you get challenged on the rate. So they stick really close to the master plan. But Vallecito's Water District is not a land planning agency. Where do they get these growth numbers from? How do they know this stuff? They look to the land planning agencies, which is the City of San Marcos, San Diego County. And they have what's called the general plan. And in their general plan, they'll actually identify each acre within their boundaries and say, this acre is going to have 5 living units. This acre is going to have 10 living units. This acre is going to have 10,000 square feet of commercial space. So they have all of these. And the master plan relies on that. They can't deviate from the general plan. But what's been happening is developers have been going in and saying, hey, you know that acre you got 5 living units slated for? I want to build 20 units on it. That's called densification. It's densification. And we didn't plan on 20. We only planned on 5. So we hired, back in 2011, we hired a consultant to come in and say, are we good? I mean, or what kind of impacts are we going to have from this densification? And basically the developer said, well, you have extra revenue coming in, because you only counted on 5 EDUs coming in, but now they're paying 20, so you got 15 more revenue coming in. And they said, that is enough to cover. You will need extra storage, water storage capacity, and there's enough in those rates to cover it. You will need extra distribution, conveyance, and collection pipes, and there's enough revenue to cover that. You will need extra sewer treatment capacity, but you don't have enough revenue to cover the sewer treatment capacity, because sewer treatment is not in the rate at all, the developer rates at all. Because if developers were to develop within the original general plan densities, we would not need any more sewer treatment. We have enough to build out, right? But because they're densifying, now we need it. But we can't just arbitrarily adjust the cap fee rate. So we hired that same consultant, and they did what's called a density impact fee, an additional fee. And boy, what an impact it had. So in public workshops to do this, and then we had a BIA representative. BIA is Building Industry Association, they're the developers. This representative for the BIA came in, and he said, I like this rate. It was done conservatively, the amount was conservative, and we're only charging it on the 15, not the whole 20 units. So we're only burdening those developers that are driving the need for this extra sewer treatment capacity, not the developers that are developing within the original densities. I like it. That representative was gone shortly after that. The development community did not want to pay this fee, so they put a slate of candidates together that unseated the incumbents. And the very next meeting after that board was seated, a developer came in and asked for an accommodation, January 2nd, 2013. Remember that graph I showed you? What it did. I can't tell you what happened, because 2 weeks after this, they had a closed session meeting, and public can't attend closed session meetings. And even though I'm not an employee anymore, it would be a violation of the California Constitution if I were to tell you what transpired at this meeting. What I can tell you is 2 years later, another developer came in, and he disclosed what happened at that meeting. That I can tell you, because that was an open session. This developer got 800 to 1,000 EDUs developed free of the sewer density impact fee. It was a $3.2 million accommodation paid for by ratepayers. That's the start of the slide. And I'm going to go into specifically what happened, and I'll use a timeline to show you. And I'll go back in history a little bit. This is starting at 2005. What did we have? A housing boom, right? Times were great. We had $50 million in ratepayer money. That's the blue line. That was plenty for an operating reserve, replacement reserve. It was healthy money. The red line is developer money. We had $30 million in developer money. Another good amount of money. We could have paid for a lot of things there. Then what happened? We had a recession, followed by a drought and a slide. The ratepayer money dipped below reserve targets, and the developer money hit zero. So I was finance manager at the time, and what did? I implemented a strategy called Bridge Reform and Transform. And this was a strategy endorsed by the Government Finance Officers Association, and the board embraced it. And the bridge portion means you bridge the gap. You do whatever it takes to get past this gap. So we did things like cut operating costs. We deferred capital projects. We had a hiring freeze. And when the MOU came up to negotiate labor, we cut employee benefits. It was an overall 17% cut to compensation. We did what we had to do, and we were bouncing back. For the developer deficit, we did the board adopted the density impact fee, and then we had the board take over. And then right away the accommodation happened, and we start to see the slide. And the next year, the year after that, developers came to the boardroom again and said, hey, this isn't fair. We are paying all these capital facility fees at the inception of a project, and then having to wait until we sell a home to recover those costs. And the board was poised to give another accommodation to the developers. And I warned the board, I said, you know, this is going to have a huge negative impact if we defer the fee. They said, oh, it's only temporary. They were confusing it with other temporary arrangements by other agencies where they said for a 2-year period, we'll move the due date to occupancy when they buy the home, and then revert it back after 2 years. They were contemplating a permanent change to the due date. And then they said, well, it's only timing. Yes, it's timing, but the negative impacts don't reverse itself until the last building in San Marcos is built. So the board gave the accommodation. And the deficit continued to slide, and we continued to build up ratepayer money to pay for that deficit. Now, if you noticed, I've been putting, I don't know if you can see that over here, but maybe you can see it here better, the rates across the bottom. Can you see that? Tom, can you see it from over there? There's rates across the bottom, water cap fee, sewer cap fee, the density impact fee. So that's following the rates. So, a year after the cap fee was deferred, that other developer I told you about before came in and said, whoa, you gave this developer this deal, it's $3.2 million. We're all still paying this density impact fee. What about us? And so they suspended the entire fee. And when you watch across the bottom, the fee went away. Because they also refunded all the sewer density impact revenue they collected. They refunded it to the developers. And so the deficit just continued to slide. And then the board gave themselves a 33% pay increase. And then they got reelected. And then came the budget where they adopted that 5-year plan to accelerate the deficit to $44 million at the expense of ratepayers. So you might ask yourself, is this legal? Anybody wondering if this is legal? What they're doing? I can't answer that question. An attorney can't answer that question. Only an administrative law judge can answer that question, and that's only if these rates are challenged. So I will give you some background on the provisions of the Constitution that deal with this. Back in the 70s, we had Proposition 13. In 1996, we had Proposition 218. And in 2010, we had Proposition 26. Collectively, they made up Article 13 of the California Constitution, which basically says you can't have a tax unless you have a 2/3 vote of the public. Property-related fees are taxes, and therefore need a 2/3 vote of the public. Water and sewer charges are property-related fees, and therefore taxes, and need a 2/3 vote of the public. But there were 6 exceptions in Proposition 218, 6 exceptions. One of the exceptions was unless you're only charging the cost of to provide the service. So this terminology came out here, cost of service. So what consultants loved it. So they went to all these agencies and said, we'll do a cost of service study, and we'll make your rates defensible so that you're only charging what it costs to provide the service. And also the statute says revenues derived from the fee or charge can only be used for the purpose for which the fee or charge was assessed. Proposition 26 added that the burden of proof is with the agency to prove that there's a nexus between the burden and the benefit to these ratepayers, basically is what that said. So what I did, I went back to, I keep mentioning June 30, 2018, because that was the last audit. So I'm trying to use audited numbers in my analysis over here. I went back to June 30, 2018, and I said, what are ratepayers paying for that they're not getting a benefit for? What are they paying for that's not a cost of service? First thing I hadn't mentioned yet on this list, Balasitos Water District has the Meadowlark Reclamation Facility in Carlsbad. And most of our sewer goes to that treatment plant. It's a scalping plant. They take the water, and the solids continue on down to Encino Wastewater Authority, where they treat and dispose of the solids. What do they do with the water? The liquids are treated to first secondary standard, and that makes it environmentally safe to dump in the ocean. And then they're treated to something called tertiary standards, and that makes it reclaimed water, purple pipes. You ever see purple pipes around, right? And you can irrigate golf courses and such with that. But we don't have purple pipes in San Marcos. So we wholesale 100% of our reclaimed water to Carlsbad and Olevenhagen. They don't pay us a per acre foot charge. What they do is they recover, we have per contract, they recover our cost of tertiary. So, and it's per formula. And the formula says 50% of the labor at Meadowlark is for tertiary. 25% of the power is for tertiary. 9% of the materials are for tertiary. 100% of the lift station costs are for tertiary. And the board asks, are we recovering our reclaimed water costs? Yes, according to this formula that was done in 1991. And since that formula, we had 2 major upgrades to the plant. The processes are completely different. I did my own cost of service study in 2017 based on a 2018 budget, and I estimated $1,317 is what it cost us to produce an acre-foot of water. I didn't finish off the power portion yet, but that's an estimate. And I just discounted it back. This is 2005 through 2017. The red line is not an estimate. That is based on audited numbers. That's what we recovered from Carlsbad and Liebenhain, divided by the number of acre feet we sold them. So that gives you a per acre foot cost. And it's pretty cheap reclaimed water. You know, there are probably other sources that might be a little bit more money than that. But they're not going to pay $1,317 for this water, because they can turn around and buy potable water from San Diego County Water Authority for $1,305. Doesn't include fixed charges, but still, we should be negotiating with them to narrow the gap, because the space between the blue line and the red line, that's a subsidy that ratepayers are paying and not getting benefit for. We don't get any reclaimed water. And for some reason, they're not negotiating the contract anymore in LA. So, anyway, not a cost of service. Most of the other stuff on this list, it makes up the $16 million deficit. But I actually went in and see what exactly are we paying for when we're funding this deficit. Most of it was debt service. So a lot of the infrastructure we have now, we have 2 huge tanks buried up in Twin Oaks. We had a couple of upgrades to the treatment plant, and then the regional plant, our share of that as well. So when debt service, when it comes time to pay bondholders back, there's no money in the developer fund, so ratepayers have to pay that money. So that's what that $13.6 million represents. The other things are projects that accommodate growth, and we pay, again, the ratepayers have paid for those. But they're no benefit because it's just accommodating growth, not existing customers. A couple other things on this list that I thought I wanted to mention too. Vallecito's Water District has an ordinance called Business of the Board. And one of the things in this ordinance is it's called an approved organization list. These organizations that we pay membership to, and it allows board members to attend these meetings and get a per diem without getting prior approval to go here. And if you look at the list of organizations, it's American Water Works Association, Association of California Water Agencies, California Association of Sanitary Agencies, San Diego North Economic Development Council. Look, wait a minute, San Diego North Economic Development Council. What does that have to do with water or sewer? Right? It sticks out like a sore thumb. All these other approved organizations are water and sewer organizations. If you look on the website, SNEDEC, we call it, San Diego North Economic Development Council, their mission is to grow San Diego County, North San Diego County, the economic base of San Diego County. Is growing the economic base of North San Diego County a cost of service? Is that necessary to provide you with water and sewer services? There are a bunch of meetings. Oh, and by the way, I did a search, a Control F on each page, Control Find on each page for the word water. And I couldn't find it anywhere except for one page. It showed up twice. It was in the name of 2 companies. So it is not related to water or sewer, but they have meetings, and the members of, it's mostly a networking group, is really what it is, but the members of this organization will send 1 representative to their business meetings. Vallecito's Water District, 4 of the board members attend the business meeting, and they each get $200 per diem for going to this meeting, and travel expenses. So if you did a Public Records Act request and said, well, what are we paying for here? Show me the agenda, show me the minutes to these meetings, you wouldn't get anything. It's not a public meeting, and they don't provide anything. So you wouldn't know. But I did save 1 request. This was submitted by a board member, and they requested reimbursement and compensation to go to baseball and beer night, and they received it. So I guess you can argue that there's water and beer. One other thing that we're paying for as ratepayers and not receiving a benefit for, it's not a cost of service, and I hate to sound like Scrooge. San Marcos Boys and Girls Club, wonderful organization. It really is a wonderful organization, but there's a specific prohibition in the California Constitution against gifts of public funds. It's Article 16, Section 6 of the Constitution. It says you can't even create a law that makes it okay to give a gift of public funds. You just can't do it. Since the board takeover, every year they've purchased a table at the auction, the annual auction of San Marcos Boys and Girls Club. $1,500 for a table. And now there's a provision in the law that says you have to make available to the public when you get these events and who you gave tickets to and how much they were and what was the government purpose for it. So you can go online. Oddly enough, it's on their transparency page. This is off of online. And this was, they don't have it posted, they just went to this year's. This was last year's event. 10 tickets they purchased, ratepayer money. 1 ticket was for the wife of a board member to attend this annual auction. The other 9 went to the board members. Only 4 board members attend. 1 board member, she's insistent that this is a gift of public funds, so I'm not going to go. But the 4 board members go. You see 9 tickets there. Where'd the other 5 go? They didn't disclose it here. But 2 years ago, if you look at the one from 2 years ago, the other tickets went to members of the development community. Now, what do they say for the purpose of this? To further governmental and public purposes of the district. That's why they went to this auction. Right? And then I did save a receipt. Typical when you go to these charitable events, you get a receipt. This one says $56 was for goods and services, the meal. The other $94 is a charitable donation deductible on your income tax return. So you can't argue really that that $94 is not a gift of public funds. The $56, I heard an argument by one of the board members one time, said I sat next to somebody and we talked about water for the whole time. That's what that one said. So how do we fix it? Hopefully that everybody understand how we got to this point. I know I had that question, how do we get to the deficit? That's how we got to the deficit, by just accommodation after accommodation to the development community. Now, how do we fix this? Let me see what the next slide is. Before we get into how do we fix it, I teach courses at Cal State San Marcos for students that are preparing to be utility managers, right? Public utility, water utility managers. So I'm stealing some slides from that class. Roles and responsibilities. Before we see how do we fix it, what are the roles and responsibilities of the players here? So, electeds, the governing board. Board members have responsibilities, mainly set the general direction of the agency. Planning is big. Policy. They have to adopt policy. And they hire, evaluate, and fire the general manager, collectively as a board. And they stay out of the way of management. They're not supposed to micromanage. So that's what board members do. Now, the general manager is responsible for everything that happens. In particular, they're responsible to implement the policies and directives of the board. That's their board. That's the only employee they have, is the general manager of the board. And I always get this question at my class at Cal State. Well, what if the board tells you to do something so crazy and you know it's wrong? Doesn't matter. They have to do it. That's their job, to implement what the board tells them to do. But they have a responsibility to tell the board and the public what are the negative impacts from their actions. Now, ratepayers, you have a responsibility too. You've got to follow the district ordinances, and you have to elect representatives that represent your interest. Now, another slide from there. Effective board members have a ratepayer focus and a long-range focus too, strategic focus. Why? We're a water agency. We're providing water. We have to be around forever. So they have to have a focus beyond their next election year. Now, I got to a point I did this 6 months ago, and there was somebody in the audience, and when I put up my list of how do you fix it, it's actually easy to fix. Should have never been here in the first place, but it's easy to fix. But I put up my list, and a member in the audience said, you're missing the very first item, is to elect a board with a ratepayer focus. You have to have the ratepayer focus. And I didn't say anything. If you notice to this point, everything I've been putting up here is from an audited financial statement, from an adopted budget, from minutes to a meeting, from some document, but I didn't have anything documented it would only be an opinion if I said they don't have a ratepayer focus. But I wanted to somehow back that up. What was their focus? And how do you tell what the focus of an elected board is? It's what they deliberate on at each board meeting. They bring the items to the board. So I went back to the board takeover and I looked at every agenda for every meeting. Just took a lot of work. I hope you guys appreciate this. Anyway, and I accumulated by category, what are they deliberating on? And first one was, that makes sense, right? Capital improvement projects and development, they're a growing agency. Administrative stuff, 141 items, 6.5 years. That's probably much, and that's supposed to be micromanaging. Policy, that's what they're supposed to be doing. Policy, 64 items. Planning is what they're supposed to be doing. 10 items on planning in 6.5 years. Eight of them were for the master plan. We don't have the master plan adopted yet. It was supposed to be adopted in 2000, we'll talk about this in detail here, but in 2015 it was supposed to be adopted. What's this year, 2019? It's still not adopted, yet we have 8 action items on the master plan. 2 other items are for the strategic plan. Oh, at least they have a strategic plan. They don't have a strategic plan. It was from the prior board that had a strategic plan, and I think they had an update or something, so there's 2 action items on that. What am I missing? I am a finance guy. What am I missing? Financial planning. 0 action items on financial planning. None.
So who prepares the agenda?
The executive
General
secretary
manager?
prepares it, the general manager, but I think your question more is, where do the items come from?
Exactly.
Political.
We'll talk about committee meetings in a little bit, but
Right.
there are committees of the board, and most of the items come from a committee. Committees can't take action, but they can say, I want to bring this to the board. Or they just pick up the phone and call the GM, put this on the board. Tim, am I missing anything? How else would you have an agenda item?
It could just be an annual item that has to be redone
Okay,
every year.
Recurring
right?
item.
Recurring
That's good,
items.
yeah, too. But mostly they're from the board, and now we have on our agenda for the Valley City Water District, we have future items for consideration. And so that's an opportunity for board members right there to tell a GM what they want to see. So they're from the board, mostly. From the board, where do they come from?
And how large is this board?
5 member board, yeah. So planning 10. The interagency and governance and JPA's administration, so we belong to the San Diego County Water Authority, the Encino Wastewater Authority, Joint Powers Authority for Insurance, and all those other agencies I mentioned have governance. So there's a whole bunch of activity here, shared governance and stuff. What about our rates? 53 items on rates and charges. What about developer rates?
None.
6. 6. 3 items were about deferring the fee. Remember we deferred the fee? The other 3 items were to do away with the density impact fee. So all these items were to give an accommodation to the development community, accelerate the deficit. None of them were to address the adequacy of the rate, even though we have this huge deficit. Next one I'm going to put up is the deficit. Only agency in San Diego County with a deficit in developer funds. How many items do you think are there to address the deficit? Reported to them every month. How many items to address the deficit? Yeah, 0. Okay, that was an easy one. 0 items. So now I can say there's no ratepayer focus. I just needed to get backup for that. So where's the focus of the board? 42 items on board compensation and reimbursement. Let's see, where am I going next? But good news, right? They're finally going to address the capital facility fee. It was supposed to be implemented in 2015, maybe 16 was the original due date for this fee. It was a 2014 master plan. That was the original name of the master plan. Why? Because it was based on data, 5-year data, ending on fiscal year 13-14, and it was going to be adopted the next year. It takes a while to put it together. Still don't have it. But now, and this was a finance committee meeting, so there's no action here. But let's go over these numbers here. So, and by the way, they didn't publish these numbers. I had to listen to audio that they posted. I think I was the second view on this this audio of this meeting. It wasn't in the minutes. There are minutes posted for this meeting, but they just said discuss rate. They didn't put the actual rates in there. So water, a little bit of an increase to the water EDU, 16%. Sewer, 86%. That's good. That's what they're contemplating, proposed. And look at this, paying back a deficit over 20 years, but paying back a deficit. Now, this is all if the assumptions in the rate model are true. Okay, this deficit will not be paid back unless all the assumptions in the rate model is true. I designed this rate model when I was there. So, assumption number 1, the proposed rates take effect July 1, 2015. 733 water EDUs a year in the first phase, 1,667 sewer EDUs. This one is actually the biggest one here, the next one I'm going to mention. All capital projects are debt financed, not financed by ratepayers. So, and to understand public utilities one more time here, what are we, we're very capital intensive, right? We're developing infrastructure that's gonna last 40, 50, 100 years. If you don't debt finance, you're burdening your current ratepayers by paying that back, but yet it's benefiting generations in the future. So it's called intergenerational equity. It's very common to borrow money. It's okay for public utilities to borrow money, that's what they do. But for some reason, they just won't do it. And if they don't do it, they'll never make that 20 years because their assumption is that they're stretching those payments beyond the planning period, which is fine, because future generations will benefit. So all those have to come true. Did any of them come true? Well, let's look at the projections. And they actually have the master plan online. It's done, and it's already been reviewed, but they just won't adopt it for some reason. Water EDUs, that they break it up into 5-year phases, and it's the assumption in this model that in the middle of each phase, they have a bond issuance that's a 20-year term. But anyway, so here's the first phase. That's a pretty aggressive assumption. That blue line is what they're saying they're going to bring in EDUs. The orange line below is what actually happened. We're already 5 years into this rate model because they just took their time on adopting it. According to them, their assumption is we would have taken in $34.5 million in water capital facility revenue. What did we take in? 11.4. This is through the end of the year, right? So we've got 3 months left, but so far that's what we have. We already have a shortfall before we even consider the rates publicly. We already have a shortfall of 23.1 million here in the water EDUs. What about sewer EDUs? That was the big increase, the 86% increase. What they're projecting through the end of this year, we should have gotten 161.3 million in sewer cap fees. What did we get? 16.2 million, 145.1 million shortfall before they even have the rate adopted. Now, a wise, good-looking finance guy once was quoted with this quote here, and this was the only time I was ever quoted accurately in a newspaper. The only time I was ever quoted accurately. And I said back in 2016 about the 2015 sewer density fee suspension, I said, if it's not being paid for by developers, it's kicking the can down the road to developers in the future, or ratepayers will pay for it. And wow, I must have been a genius. How prophetic. That's what's happening. I didn't have to be, anybody could have told you that, right? And sure enough, that's what's happening now. Ratepayers are paying the developers' obligations. Some other significant things that happened at this meeting that I had to listen to. It was an hour-long meeting. But, and by the way, we were talking about committees, right? Where committees, it's not like the city, it's not like members of the public are on a committee. This is just 2 board members staff each of these committees. We have a finance committee, engineering committee, personnel committee, legal affairs committee, or something like that. And you're supposed to rotate, it's by ordinance, you rotate the board members that serve on these committees. Mike Sinella and Hal Martin have been on the finance committee since 2014. They've never changed. They've always been on that committee. Mike Sinella's quote, "The real impact from these fees is not on the developer, it's on the people who buy the houses. What sets the price of a home? The market. If a developer pays these fees, are they going to tack it on the price of the home? No, it just cuts into their profit margin, right? So Sinella's saying, oh no, it's the ratepayer. That's why we want to keep the rates low, the developer rates low, because the rate, no, it doesn't have an impact on the rate. I'm not sure, well, I don't know why I said it, but Hal Martin's quote, "It's important to me to know what other agencies are charging. I want to be competitive." So he's not interested in recovering the developer fund's impacts. He just wants to have the lowest developer fund rate, But competitive, the developers go, let's see, where do I want to build? Oh, your rates are too high. I'm going to build in VID. No, there is no opportunities to build in this irrigation district. Of course, they're going to build here. So there's no reason to have that mentality that it needs to be competitive. He just wants to keep the rates low to developers. Here's another great quote from that meeting. Ratepayers are receiving interest on the deficit, on what they're paying for the developers. What's the interest rate? 1.1%. It's based on our investment portfolio, and we're not allowed as a public entity to invest in equities or anything high risk. So, and we didn't receive any of that interest yet because of the deficit. So it's kind of funny. Yeah, not funny. This is a big one I'll talk about in the next slide. We'll be meeting with the BIA, developers, with the proposed fees before going public. Okay. We'll talk about that in a minute. When will the rates increase? Quote, whenever, quote. So there's no, for them, there's no urgency to increase these rates. And this is a big one, unfortunately, I don't have time to spend on it, but if you want to stick around, I'll tell you about it. New rate structure for 2020. And unfortunately, if I'm invited back, it might be too late, it might already be in place by October is the next political economy days. I'm going to talk about that one where they said they're negotiating or they're going to meet with the BIA before going public with the rate. There is the most pervasive California provision in the Constitution, the Public Meeting Act, the Open Meeting Act. Every member that gets elected to a governing board is provided with this provision of the law. It says basically that all business of the public needs to be conducted at a public meeting. And here they are meeting with the developers before they make the rate public. That's a pretty obvious violation of our California Constitution. Now, when they meet with developers and they show them the rates I showed you, do you think the developers are going to say, "Whoa, you were too aggressive on your growth assumption. This is what you need to reduce your denominator." They do need to reduce their denominator. Remember I told you how math, you reduce the denominator, what happens to the number? It gets bigger. You think developers are going to tell them, "Oh, we'll never recover that deficit, you need to reduce the denominator"? You think the developers are going to say, "You collected all these EDUs at the existing rate, it's supposed to be at the higher rate. You need to put that difference in the numerator"? They're not going to tell them that. It's going to be very interesting to see when they finally have a public hearing on these rates, or a public workshop on the rates. What are they going to show the public? Are they going to show those same numbers I showed you? The public doesn't know those, or are they going to be some lesser number because they negotiated with the BIA before going public? That's pretty huge. Tim, what do you think of that? Is that incredible or what? What? You believe it, right?
Who keeps track of all that? Who's the watchdog?
You.
It's you.
You're the ratepayer. We don't have a PUC. PUC, Public Utility Commission, is for private entities. We're a public entity. So you elect the governing board, and we'll get into that in a minute. Let's see. Oh, we're wrapping up here pretty soon. Sorry to keep you so late here. But anyway, how do we fix it? Now I can finally put up there, you have to elect officials with the ratepayer focus. They have to have focus on financial planning and recovering this deficit. It starts with the board. It has to be there. By the way, all these are easy. It should have been done a long time ago.
They're like no-brainers.
Yes.
They're just evident.
Right. I provided them to the general manager. I told them when I was there, and then when I left, I provided them. And when I talked 6 months ago, I again provided these to the general manager. But anyway, raise the cap fee now. The more that, remember that delay shortfall I showed you? The more we wait, the bigger that shortfall gets. And then plus, when you adopt these cap fee rates, there's a provision in the law that says you have a 60-day wait period before they come effective. What are developers going to do? Right? They got all these EDUs they didn't pay for yet because they're waiting to sell a home. They're going to say, "I'm going to pay for all these EDUs now at a low rate." So our model is just shot. It's just shot already. And issuing bonds, I already talked about issuing bonds. Extremely, extremely important to issue bonds and issue debt. What a burden we're being faced with because they just won't issue debt. Revert the cap fee to project inception, at least until the deficit's recovered. Negotiate contracts with Carlsbad and Liebenhain. That they stopped negotiations on reclaimed water when I left. I don't know, they just probably don't have the staff to do it. So it's incredible. We just keep spending money on that. Reserve policy. I wrote the reserve policy in 2008. It was a wonderful, innovative reserve policy that got us out of the recession, but it sucks now. How can you have a reserve policy that allows you to run up $94 million in ratepayer money to fund a $44 million developer deficit? They need a new reserve policy. For some reason, they just won't write a new reserve policy. And certainly embrace the spirit of Propositions 218 and 26. Only spend ratepayer money for the benefit of the ratepayer. Great quote by the President of the European Commission, right? We all know what to do, we just don't know how to get reelected after we've done it. So these politicians that are in there now get, at least Hal Martin and Mike Sinella, they get scores of thousands of dollars from the development community every time they're elected. Of course, look at the benefit they got, right? If they were to do all the things I'm saying to do, that revenue stream would be cut off for them, okay? So, before I open it up for questions, and please take my number if you have any questions or want to know what to do about this. The one question I'll always get right off the bat is, well, what do you do if they don't do anything, right? This deficit is going to accelerate like crazy. It's unbelievable. So, what can you do? There's not much you can do about it, and I hate to sound pessimistic, but what happens is, are there any voters here, and there's at least a couple voters in Sinella's or Martin's district, I'm not sure which district you're in, but there may be just 2 or 3 voters here in their district. It's by district, that's how they're governed, right? There's about 20,000 voters in each district.
Yeah.
So what happens are that the scores of thousands of dollars that they get, they spend it on mailers. There's no law, by the way, that says you have to tell the truth in campaigning material, okay? And they'll just blanket all the voters, and then they'll influence their perception of what's going on. That's how they got on board in the first place. So, so I hate to be pessimistic, but it's very hard to change this because you have to get them off the board first. So the one thing you can do in June, there's going to be an adopted budget. And then right after the adopted budget, they go into rates. Provisions of Proposition 218 says you have to get a notice of the public hearing 45 days in advance of the public hearing, and you have an opportunity to protest the rate. If there's a majority protest, you can't raise the rates. That's 11,000 letters. They'll never get that. And traditionally, we used to get 0 to 14. The last one was 50 letters. But at least if they get hundreds, hopefully thousands of letters, it'll put their candidacy in peril, they might think, so it'll send them a message. Now, they're not doing us any favors, and they've done this before, they're not doing any favors if they say, we won't raise the rates. And if they don't do any of those things I've mentioned, it's just going to make it way worse after the election. Our rates will go through the roof. So don't be fooled by politicians that say, oh, well, we won't raise the rates. Take care of that deficit. The problem's never going to go away. So anyway, my protest letter is going to be 5 pages long. Yours can just be, I protest the rates. That's it. Or call me, I'll help you structure one. But somehow we have to get the word out to get protest letters into the district when they do the rates. It's not going to do any good about, preventing them from raising the rates, but at least it sends them a message. Second thing, San Diego County Taxpayers Association does awards every May, and the nominations for them are in February. So watch out for that February date. Now they have awards for efficient use of taxpayer money, and they have awards for inefficient use, called the Golden Fleece Award, right? And now you have to, when you nominate a government agency for this award, you have to have the backup for it. So you can't just say, you have to have, so when I do mine, I will have copies of the audited financial statement, or at least links to where the audited financial statements are and where I'm getting these numbers from. It's easy for me to back it up. But if it's just me nominating, I think they're just a volunteer staff organization. They'll just ignore it if there's one nomination. But if we get several nominations into that will really get their attention if they get a Golden Fleece Award. Do you think this is an efficient use of ratepayer money? We're just giving it to the developers, is what we're doing. So